Randolph Scott really hated him more than anyone else. Randolph Scott was born with the name George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia. He grew up in a large, well-mannered Southern family, a family that believed in discipline, education, and doing what was right. These beliefs would later affect how he acted in movies and how he lived his life. His father, George Grant Scott, was a well-respected man who worked in the textile business and ran his company with strong principles. He expected his children to follow the same rules. His mother, Lucille Crane Scott, was known for being elegant and graceful. She taught her children good manners, culture, and how to respect other people. Randolph was the second child, out of 7 children. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, he learned to be quietly confident and to do the right thing. These qualities became important parts of the movie characters he played. The Scott home was a place where children could be seen and heard, where dinner talks included discussions about books, current events, and right and wrong. Young Randolph learned from these talks and carried these lessons with him his whole life. He first went to private schools, then to Georgia Institute of Technology, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He planned to work in business or engineering like his father, but fate and Hollywood had other plans. At college, Scott did well in his classes, but also found he loved sports and outdoor activities. He was very good at horseback riding, which would help him a lot in his future job. His college years made him a well-rounded young man who combined learning with physical skills. Scott didn't become famous right away. After serving with honor in World War I as an artillery officer in France, he came back to regular life with a new sense of purpose. The war had changed him and gave him a deeper understanding of courage, sacrifice, and what it really meant to be a man with principles. In the early 1920s, while visiting California, he became interested in the growing movie industry there. With his tall, athletic body, handsome looks, and Southern charm, casting directors noticed him. He was 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence that people couldn't ignore. His blue eyes and strong features looked good on camera, but it was his natural charm that really made him stand out. He started his acting career at the bottom, working as an extra and stuntman, before getting small speaking parts. His early work showed determination and humility, which made him different from many other actors back then. He would show up early to work, learn his lines perfectly, and treat everyone, from the director to the crew members, with equal respect. By the late 1920s, he had regular work in Hollywood, and soon started working in talking pictures. His deep, strong voice gave him a powerful presence. Unlike some silent movie stars who had trouble with the change to sound, Scott's voice became one of his best features. It had a natural authority, without being harsh, and warmth, without being soft. During the 1930s and 1940s, Randolph Scott's career grew. He appeared in many different kinds of movies, from comedies to dramas. He worked with some of Hollywood's biggest stars, including Cary Grant, with whom he famously shared a beach house for several years. This living arrangement became one of Hollywood's most talked-about friendships. But it was the Western that really made him a legend. Films like The Last of the Mohicans in 1936, Western Union in 1941, and The Desperados in 1943 made Scott the perfect Western hero. He was calm, honorable, and strong when facing trouble. His characters followed a moral code, based on being decent and courageous, which matched his real-life personality. Unlike many other actors, Scott avoided the problems that came with being a celebrity. He didn't drink heavily, didn't look for scandals, and didn't waste his money on unnecessary expensive things. People knew him for being professional, quiet, and dedicated to his work. His work with director Bud Boetticher during the 1950s created some of the best westerns ever made, including 7 Men from Now in 1956, Ride Lonesome in 1959, and Comanche Station in 1960. These films, now seen as masterpieces, showed Scott as a man of action, who was troubled by past regrets, but guided by a strong sense of right and wrong. The partnership between Scott and Boetticher made what movie critics would later call the renown cycle. a series of lean, efficient westerns that got rid of the extra stuff and focused on character and moral problems. Scott's influence went far beyond his last movie appearance in Ride the High Country in 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that film, he played an aging lawman, trying to hold on to his principles in a changing world. This role showed his own graceful exit from Hollywood. When he retired, he did so with dignity, choosing to leave movies on his own terms. He invested his money wisely, in real estate and business, and eventually became one of the richest actors of his time. His business skills were remarkable for an actor of his time. He bought property all over Los Angeles and made smart investments in oil wells and securities. By the time he retired, his net worth was estimated to be over $100 million, making him one of the wealthiest men in Hollywood history. But despite his financial success, he stayed modest, down to earth, and focused on his family and faith. He never showed off his wealth, or lived in an over-the-top way. Preferring comfort over extravagance, Randolph Scott married twice during his life. Both marriages showed different sides of his personality, one marked by high society, and the other by quiet family happiness. His first marriage happened in 1936, when he married Marion DuPont, a woman whose family name was very famous in American industry and society. Marion was the daughter of William DuPont Sr., a member of the wealthy and powerful DuPont family. She was also the great-granddaughter of Eleuthère Irénée Dupont de Nemours, the French-born chemist and businessman who founded the DuPont Company, one of the most powerful industrial corporations in American history. Through this marriage, Scott entered a world of inherited wealth and old money privilege. That was very different from his modest upbringing in North Carolina. Marion DuPont herself was an interesting and accomplished woman. She wasn't just someone who inherited money, but an independent, strong-willed horse lover with a deep passion for horse breeding and racing. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia estate that had once been President James Madison's home. She turned it into a world-class horse breeding and training facility. Before marrying Scott, Marion had been married to George Somerville, a Virginia sportsman. Interestingly, Randolph Scott had been best man at their wedding. This strange connection added an unusual twist to their later relationship, suggesting that their bond grew slowly, and perhaps unexpectedly, from friendship into romance. However, despite the glamour around their marriage, Scott and Marion DuPont's union was not meant to last. Their worlds, though both privileged, were very different. Scott, at that time a rising Hollywood star, was focused on building his acting career in California. Meanwhile, Marion was deeply involved in her horse activities and the social traditions of the East Coast. The couple often lived apart, separated by both distance and lifestyle. In 1939, just 3 years after their wedding, their marriage ended in divorce. Though the marriage produced no children, the separation was reportedly friendly. Interestingly, Marion continued to use the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, keeping his last name for nearly 5 decades, until her death in 1983. This lasting choice perhaps showed a lingering fondness or respect between them, or simply her desire to keep a name that had come to define her public identity in the world of horse racing and charity work. After several years of being single, Randolph Scott found lasting happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he married Patricia Stillman, a beautiful actress who was 21 years younger than him. Patricia had briefly appeared in films during the early 1940s, but after marrying Scott, she focused mainly on family life. Their relationship was very different from Scott's earlier, more socially strategic marriage with Marion DuPont. This time, the marriage seemed based on real affection and shared values. The couple settled into a comfortable and lasting family life, avoiding much of the Hollywood spotlight that so often destroyed celebrity marriages of that time. In 1950, Randolph and Patricia expanded their family by adopting 2 children, a daughter named Sandra and a son named Christopher. Scott, who had built his screen image as a tough and calm Western hero, was by all accounts a devoted and gentle father. Friends and colleagues often talked about the warmth of his home life and the strong bond he shared with his wife and children. He would read bedtime stories, go to school events, and take his children riding on weekends. Unlike many other actors, Scott managed to keep a stable marriage, free from scandal or public drama. His family life became one of the foundations of his later happiness. Randolph and Patricia's marriage lasted for 4 decades, until his death in 1987, and it remained one of Hollywood's quieter success stories. Patricia was known to say that Randolph was the same man at home as he was on screen, honest, dependable, and kind. Away from the bright lights of the movie industry, the Scotts lived a peaceful life. They split their time between their home in Beverly Hills and their ranch near Santa Barbara, where Randolph could enjoy his lifelong love of horses and the open countryside. At the ranch, Scott would wake up early, take care of his horses, and ride through the hills before breakfast. It was there that he found true peace, away from cameras and crowds. Through this lasting partnership, Scott found the kind of stability and peace that had escaped him in his first marriage, a calm family world that matched the strong, dependable characters he so often played on screen. In the world of Hollywood westerns, few people were as big as Randolph Scott and John Wayne. Both were huge icons of rugged masculinity, each representing a different kind of heroism on screen. Yet behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. While fans often assumed that two such similar stars would share mutual respect, the truth was far more complicated. Randolph Scott, the refined Southern gentleman with perfect manners and a quiet sense of dignity, had a deep and lasting dislike for John Wayne. Their differences went beyond professional rivalry. They were based on personality, values, and how each man viewed the art of acting. And the code of the cowboy. "I never cared for the man," Scott once said bluntly. "He represented everything in Hollywood I didn't admire." Scott had always taken pride in restraint, both on and off the screen. His performances were measured, careful, and quietly powerful. He didn't need to shout or show off to show strength. John Wayne, on the other hand, was all about showing off. Loud, boisterous, and demanding attention wherever he went. "Wayne was a showman," Scott remarked, "and I was a craftsman. There's a difference." To Scott, Wayne's kind of heroism felt theatrical, almost exaggerated. He saw Wayne as a product of Hollywood myth-making, rather than the disciplined storytelling that Scott valued. Behind the polished image of the Duke, Scott saw what he called a salesman's version of the West, more focused on image than integrity. Their professional paths crossed occasionally, though never in direct competition on film. However, the undercurrent of competition was clear. Both were leading men in westerns throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and producers often compared their box office success. "The studios tried to pit us against each other," Scott recalled. "But the truth is, we never needed to be compared. We were playing two different games." Scott's films often had moral subtlety, a sense of internal struggle and thinking, while Wayne's movies thrived on spectacle and patriotic passion. Scott found that approach shallow. "I played men who questioned their choices," he said. Wayne played men who never questioned anything. Beyond artistic disagreements, their personalities clashed. Scott was known for his calm, gentlemanly behavior, rarely raising his voice or bragging about his success. Wayne, on the other hand, was loud and politically outspoken, often taking over conversations with his conservative views and bombastic confidence. "He liked to talk politics and war," Scott once remarked. "Two things I never believed should be glorified in a bar or on a movie set." Wayne's self-assured patriotism, so often expressed in black and white moral terms, deeply annoyed Scott, who believed life, like the frontier, was full of gray areas. Their opposing personalities meant that any meeting between them often ended in tense silence or cutting remarks. There were also personal insults that made the rift wider. On several occasions, Scott reportedly felt disrespected by Wayne's casual comments about his acting style. Wayne, known for being blunt, once called Scott too pretty to play a real cowboy. Scott never forgot that insult. "He thought being loud made him authentic," Scott later said. "I thought being real meant being quiet." The comment hurt Scott deeply, because it dismissed the very thing he valued most: subtle, nuanced performance that didn't rely on being loud. Even within Hollywood circles, people knew that Scott would politely leave a party if Wayne arrived. Their mutual friends, actors like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea, were often caught in the middle, careful not to praise one man in front of the other. Some tried to arrange reconciliations, or at least civil meetings, but these efforts always failed. The two men were simply too different, their values too opposed, to ever find common ground. Yet perhaps the deepest reason for Scott's dislike came from what he saw as hypocrisy. Wayne, despite his on-screen image as a fearless hero, had avoided military service during World War II, a decision that many in Hollywood quietly resented. Scott, who supported the war effort in other ways and held a lifelong respect for soldiers, saw this as a moral failure. "I didn't judge men who stayed home," Scott said, "but I couldn't stomach those who pretended to fight wars on screen after refusing to serve in one." To Scott, that contradiction defined Wayne's character, a man more concerned with appearances than principles. This was perhaps the one thing Scott could never forgive or overlook. Despite his dislike, Scott never launched public attacks or tried to damage Wayne's legacy. His dislike was private, revealed only in honest interviews late in life. "I respected his success," Scott admitted, "but I never respected the man." He understood that Wayne had earned his place in movie history, but personal respect was something entirely different. The two Western legends remained professional, their paths rarely crossing after the 1950s. Yet their silent feud became part of Hollywood folklore. For all their differences, both men shaped the Western genre in deep ways. Scott through quiet dignity and moral complexity, Wayne through larger-than-life heroism. Ironically, their contrast may have been what kept the genre balanced. Where Wayne showed audiences one version of the American hero, Scott offered another, equally valid, but basically different. Still, in Randolph Scott's heart, there was no affection, no friendship, only a deep and lasting dislike. "John Wayne," he once said with cold finality, "was the last man I'd ride the range with." In his final years, Randolph Scott lived quietly, rarely giving interviews or making public appearances. He had said what he needed to say through his films, and he saw no need to continue performing off-screen. He spent his time with Patricia, his children, and his grandchildren, enjoying the simple pleasures of family life. He watched the Western genre change and evolve, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but he never expressed regret about leaving when he did. He had lived life on his own terms, both on screen and off. Randolph Scott died of heart and lung problems in 1987 at the age of 89 in Beverly Hills, California. He was buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina, returning home to the place where his journey had begun. Nearly 9 decades earlier, he and his wife Patricia had been married for 43 years. She died in 2004 and is buried next to her husband. Their mid-century modern home was torn down in 2008. The Randolph Scott papers, which included photos, scrapbooks, notes, letters, articles, and house plans, were given to the UCLA Library Special Collections, where they remain available for researchers and film historians who want to study the life of one of Hollywood's most principled and dignified stars.